If Donald Trump is indicted this week, it will be the first time in U.S. history that a former president has been charged with a crime. Joining me now is Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer, presidential historian Jon Meacham. He also occasionally advises President Biden on historical matters and major speeches. John, in historical context, there's a strange juxtaposition between the specifics of the alleged crime here, if in fact he's indictment for it, the scale of some of the wrongdoing I think that Trump has done in terms of the scope of American history and the Constitution. How do you see this being remembered historically, its significance?
Well, I think we're at the beginning of this drama. One would hope we were toward the end of it, but I don't think we should count on that. One of the things you were just talking about it, the basic rules of American politics when Donald Trump is involved have been suspended. This is not 1974. This is not even 1998. This is just a different analogy-free world. And I think we have to keep that in mind. Some of the perennial forces that we've seen elsewhere in the world, autocratic forces, a tendency toward a cult of personality, those are the things that are sweeping the land here, which sounds rather grand, but it has the virtue of being true. What I think we have to understand and think about, both with the possible indictment in New York, the Georgia case, other New York case, and then the largest question, which is, what are we going to do when a huge chunk of one of the two major parties in the United States of America would still walk through fire for this guy, right? I mean, that's a central problem that no legal action can take care of. So of those two questions, I think it's incumbent on those of us who think that Trumpism is a virus that has to be confronted. It's incumbent on us to tell a different story, to tell the story that, in fact, the Constitution matters, the rule of law matters, the Declaration of Independence, when it's set out as our standard and we try to reach it, which is as old a standard in American life as Jefferson to Martin Luther King. If we don't have that story as a competing narrative, then we're going to be locked in this endless reality show. And the problem with it is it's not a show. We've seen that on January 6th. We've seen it again and again. And I believe that this generation, again, this is going to sound grand, but I believe firmly that this generation will be judged by our success or our failure at standing up to a totalitarian impulse in the United States.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been trying to work my way through is the rule of law, right, and the competing stories about its usage, right? So at one level, right, the Trump and his followers tell a story of American decline as represented in an abuse of the rule of law to bring down a political enemy, which is a thing that does happen in countries that are in democratic decline. I think others, myself included, see Trump as an example of a sort of permanent exception, right, to the rule of law, that he escapes from accountability precisely because of his either legal or political power. And those are the sort of two stories that are being told fundamentally here. I mean, ultimately, one of them, I think, will be the enduring one that is the story that we tell about this era.
Absolutely. Here's the thing about the right-wing narrative about this. Let the law unfold. Thomas Paine, before we were even a country, said the king is not the law in America, the law is the king. So there's an indictment. That's not the end of the story. There's going to be a judge, and there's going to be a jury, and there's going to be a trial. And let's let that process unfold. An indictment is not a necessary weaponization, and that's a matter of prosecutorial discretion. And I understand all the caveats about, oh, this isn't the one to start with and all that, but you know what? Life doesn't work like that, as we've seen endlessly here. Obviously, the attempted theft of a presidential election and an insurrection outweigh this. But here's the thing. The rule of law moves slowly, it grinds slowly, and that's what we're just going to have to be patient, but we're going to have to be persistent in standing up to the broad effects of Trumpism.